Stop. Just stop for a moment. I know you're rushing. I know your mind is spinning with 1,000 worries, 1,000 fears, 1,000 what-ifs that keep you awake at night. But right here, right now, I need you to pause. Because if you're watching this video, if something drew you to click on these words, then your soul is crying out for something deeper than another quick fix or motivational speech. You see, there's a reason why Psalm 23 has been whispered in hospital rooms, recited at gravesides, and clung to in the darkest valleys of human experience for thousands of years. It's not just poetry. It's not just ancient words on an ancient page. It's a lifeline thrown to drowning souls. And today, I want to show you exactly why this psalm has the power to transform your deepest pain into unshakable peace. But before we dive into these life-changing truths, let me tell you something that might surprise you. Most people read Psalm 23 completely wrong. They rush through it like it's some sort of spiritual checklist, missing the profound reality that David is revealing about the very nature of God's heart toward you. And when you finally see what David saw, when you finally understand what he understood about the shepherd's love, everything changes. My name is your name, and for the past time period, I've been studying not just what the Bible says, but how it transforms lives from the inside out. I've walked with people through their darkest seasons. I've seen marriages restored, addictions broken, and hopeless hearts come alive again. And I can tell you this with absolute certainty. There is something supernatural that happens when you truly encounter the heart of God revealed in these 26 words. Now I know what some of you might be thinking. I've heard Psalm 23 a million times. I could probably recite it in my sleep. But here's what I've discovered after years of diving deep into the original Hebrew, after studying the cultural context, after seeing how this psalm has literally saved lives. Familiarity can be the enemy of revelation. Sometimes the verses we know the best are the ones we understand the least, and that's exactly why I've spent months preparing this series for you. We're not going to rush through this. We're not going to treat these words like some sort of spiritual band-aid that you slap on your problems and hope for the best. No, we're going to dissect every single phrase. We're going to unpack every hidden treasure. And by the time we're finished, you're going to have tools that will sustain you through any storm life throws your way. Because here's the thing that nobody talks about. Life is hard, really hard. And if you're honest about your story, if you're honest about the weight you're carrying right now, then you know exactly what I mean. Maybe you're dealing with a diagnosis that's turned your world upside down. Maybe your marriage is hanging by a thread. Maybe your kids have walked away from everything you taught them. Maybe you're drowning in debt, or battling depression, or wondering if God even sees you in your pain. Listen to me carefully. David wrote Psalm 23 from a place of deep personal experience with every single one of those feelings. This wasn't theoretical theology for him. This was survival. This was a man who had been hunted like an animal, who had lost children, who had been betrayed by his closest friends, who had made mistakes that haunted him for years. And yet, from that place of raw, honest brokenness, he penned words that would become the most beloved passage in all of Scripture. But David discovered something in his darkest moments that most of us miss in our comfortable Christianity. He discovered that God isn't just powerful, he's personal. He's not just holy, he's intimate. He's not just sovereign. He's a shepherd who knows your name, who counts your tears, who fights for you when you're too weak to fight for yourself. And that's exactly what we're going to explore together in this series. We're going to walk through each verse, each phrase, each word of Psalm 23, and I'm going to show you how to apply these truths in ways that will revolutionize your relationship with God and transform how you face every challenge. in your life. Now, I need to warn you about something. This isn't going to be your typical Sunday school lesson. We're going to go deep. We're going to get uncomfortable, because real transformation doesn't happen in the shallow end of faith. It happens when you're willing to dive beneath the surface and discover truths that will shake you to your very core. In part 1, we're going to unpack those first 4 words. The Lord is my shepherd. And I'm going to show you 3 revolutionary truths hidden in that simple declaration that will change everything about how you see God, how you see yourself, and how you face tomorrow. We're going to explore what it really means to have a shepherd in a world that tells you to be your own boss, make your own way, and trust no one but yourself. Then we're going to dive into I lack nothing, and I'm going to reveal why this isn't about material prosperity or positive thinking, but about something far more profound that addresses the deepest longings of your heart. We'll discover how David could make such a bold claim even when his life was falling apart, and how you can experience that same supernatural contentment regardless of your circumstances. But that's just the beginning. Over the next several parts, we're going to journey through green pastures and still waters. We're going to walk through that valley of the shadow of death, and we're going to sit at a table prepared in the presence of your enemies. Each stop on this journey is going to equip you with practical, life-changing insights that you can apply immediately to whatever you're facing right now. And here's what I love about Psalm 23. It's not just comforting, it's comprehensive. It addresses every aspect of human need: physical provision, emotional healing, spiritual guidance, protection from enemies, hope in suffering, and the promise of eternal security. David gives us a complete blueprint for thriving in an unpredictable world. But before we jump into verse 1, I want you to understand something crucial about the context in which David wrote these words. This wasn't penned in a palace surrounded by luxury and ease. Most scholars believe David wrote this during one of the most difficult seasons of his life, possibly while he was fleeing from his own son, Absalom, who was trying to kill him and steal his throne. Can you imagine that level of betrayal? Your own child turning against you, everything you've built crumbling around you, having to run for your life from the very people you've loved and served. Yet it's from this place of profound pain that David declares with unwavering confidence, "The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing." That's the power of genuine faith. It's not denial of reality. It's not pretending everything is fine when it's not. It's recognizing a deeper reality that transcends your circumstances. It's anchoring your identity and security in something that cannot be shaken, even when everything around you is falling apart. And that's exactly what we're going to discover together. How to find that unshakable foundation. How to experience God's provision when your bank account says otherwise. How to find peace when your world is in chaos. How to have hope when everything looks hopeless. But I need to be honest with you about something. This journey we're about to take together isn't going to be easy. Real spiritual growth never is. We're going to confront some hard truths about yourself, about God, and about life that might make you uncomfortable. We're going to challenge some assumptions you've carried for years. We're going to dig beneath the surface of familiar verses and discover depths you never knew existed. Some of you watching this are at the end of your rope. You've tried everything else, and nothing has worked. You've read the self-help books. You've attended the seminars. You've tried positive thinking and manifestation and meditation, and you're still empty. You're still anxious. You're still afraid. You're still carrying burdens that are crushing the life out of you. If that's you, then you're exactly where David was when he wrote these words. You're exactly where God wants to meet you. Because it's often in our deepest desperation that we become most open to his deepest truths. It's when we finally admit that we can't fix ourselves, we can't save ourselves, we can't shepherd ourselves, that we become ready to discover what it really means to have the Lord as our shepherd. Others of you might be thinking, my life is actually pretty good right now. I don't really need this, and I want to challenge you with this. Psalm 23 isn't just for crisis moments. It's for building a foundation that will sustain you when those crisis moments inevitably come. It's for discovering a depth of relationship with God that transforms not just how you handle problems, but how you experience joy, purpose, and meaning in every season of life. So whether you're in the valley or on the mountaintop, whether you're facing your greatest trial or enjoying your greatest triumph, these truths are for you. They're for every human heart that longs for security, for peace, for purpose, for love that never fails. Now, before we dive into our first verse, I want to give you something that's going to make this entire journey even more powerful. I've created a companion study guide that goes along with each part of this series. It includes reflection questions, practical application steps, and space for you to journal your own discoveries as we walk through Psalm 23 together. You can download it completely free using the link in the description below. Trust me, you're going to want this guide, because transformation doesn't just happen by listening. It happens by engaging, by wrestling with these truths, by allowing the Holy Spirit to make them personal and real in your own life. And this study guide is designed to help you do exactly that. Also, if this content is speaking to your heart, if you're already sensing that God wants to do something significant in your life through this series, I want to encourage you to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We're going to be releasing a new part every week, and each one builds on the last. You don't want to miss a single episode because each piece of this puzzle is crucial for seeing the complete picture of God's heart for you. And speaking of God's heart, that's really what this entire series is about. It's not just about finding comfort in difficult times, though these truths will absolutely comfort you. It's not just about learning to trust God more, though your faith will definitely grow. It's about discovering who God really is beneath all the religious language and theological concepts. It's about encountering the heart of a shepherd who loves you more than you can possibly imagine. So are you ready? Are you ready to stop running on empty? Are you ready to discover rest for your weary soul? Are you ready to experience the kind of peace that doesn't depend on your circumstances, the kind of security that can't be shaken by economic uncertainty or health scares or relationship problems? Then take a deep breath, quiet your heart, and let's begin this journey together. Let's discover why millions of people across thousands of years have found hope, healing, and transformation in these simple yet profound words. The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. In our next part, we're going to unpack those first 4 revolutionary words that will change everything about how you see God's role in your life. But for now, just rest in this truth. You are not alone, you are not forgotten, and you are not beyond hope. The shepherd is calling your name. Because here's what I've discovered after walking alongside thousands of people through their darkest seasons. The moment you truly understand what it means to call God your shepherd, everything shifts. Not just your circumstances, though sometimes those change too, but something deeper shifts. Your perspective transforms. Your anxiety begins to quiet. Your restless heart finally finds the peace it's been desperately searching for. But most of us have never really considered what shepherding actually involves. We live in a world of concrete and steel, of corporate ladders and digital connections. The closest most of us get to sheep is seeing them in a petting zoo or driving past a field on vacation. So when David says, "The Lord is my shepherd," we nod our heads and think we understand. But we're missing the profound depth of what he's actually declaring. Let me paint you a picture of what shepherding looked like in David's world, because this isn't just poetry, it's a job description. And when you see what a shepherd actually does, when you understand the level of commitment and care and sacrifice involved, you'll never read these words the same way again. A shepherd in ancient Israel wasn't someone who watched sheep from a distance. This wasn't a 9-to-5 job where you clocked out and went home. A shepherd lived with the sheep. He slept among them. He knew each one by name, knew their personalities, their tendencies, their weaknesses. He could tell from across a field if one of his sheep was limping or sick or afraid. The shepherd led them to the best pastures, not just any pastures. He knew where the grass was greenest, where the water was cleanest, where the shelter was strongest. He planned their entire day around their needs, not his convenience. And when danger came, when wolves circled or lions prowled, the shepherd didn't run. He didn't hire security. He stood between the predator and his flock, even if it meant risking his own life. David knew this intimately because he had been that shepherd. He had killed lions and bears with his bare hands to protect his father's sheep. He had spent countless nights under the stars, vigilant and watchful, while his flock slept peacefully around him. So when he declares, "The Lord is my shepherd," he's not speaking theoretically. He's speaking from the deepest place of personal experience. But here's where it gets even more beautiful. David isn't just saying that God is like a shepherd. He's saying that the Lord of the universe, the creator of heaven and earth, the one who spoke galaxies into existence, has chosen to relate to you with the same intimate, personal, sacrificial care that a shepherd shows his sheep. Think about that for a moment. The God who doesn't need anything, who lacks nothing, who is perfectly complete in himself, has voluntarily taken on the role of your personal shepherd. Not because he has to, not because you've earned it, not because you're so impressive or important in the grand scheme of things, but because that's who he is. That's his heart toward you. And this is where most of us struggle, isn't it? We can accept that God is powerful. We can even accept that God is loving in some general cosmic sense. But the idea that the creator of the universe knows your name, cares about your daily struggles, is personally invested in your well-being, is actively working on your behalf even when you can't see it. That's harder to believe, especially when life feels chaotic, especially when you're facing problems that seem bigger than you can handle, especially when you've been praying and praying and the answer seems to be silence. In those moments, it's easy to wonder if God really sees you, if he really cares, if he's really involved in the details of your ordinary, messy, complicated life. But David is making a declaration here that cuts through all of our doubt and fear and uncertainty. He's saying that regardless of how things appear, regardless of what your circumstances are screaming at you, regardless of how abandoned or forgotten you might feel, there is a shepherd who has never taken his eyes off you, not for a second, not even when you've wandered far from where you should be. And this shepherd isn't just watching from a distance, hoping things work out for you. He's actively leading you, protecting you, providing for you, fighting battles on your behalf that you don't even know are happening. He's working behind the scenes, orchestrating details, opening doors, closing others, moving pieces on a chessboard so vast and complex that you can only see a tiny fraction of what's actually happening. But here's what I love about David's choice of words. He doesn't say the Lord is a shepherd or the Lord is like a shepherd. He says the Lord is my shepherd. It's personal, it's possessive, it's intimate. David is claiming a relationship, not just acknowledging a concept. And that little word, my, makes all the difference in the world. Because you can believe intellectually that God is loving and caring and good, but until you personalize it, until you make it about your life, your struggles, your fears, your future, it remains just another nice religious idea that doesn't really change anything. When David says, my shepherd, he's saying I belong to him and he belongs to me. We have a relationship. He knows me personally. He's committed to me specifically. When I'm in trouble, he doesn't just send help. He comes himself. When I'm lost, he doesn't just point me in the right direction. He comes looking for me. When I'm weak, he doesn't just offer encouragement from afar. He carries me. This is revolutionary, especially in David's time. The gods of the surrounding nations were distant, unpredictable, demanding. They required constant appeasement, elaborate rituals, expensive sacrifices, and even then you could never be sure they actually cared about you as an individual. But David is describing a God who has chosen to be personally, intimately involved in the daily details of his life. And here's what I need you to understand. This same God wants to be your personal shepherd too. Not because you're perfect, not because you have your life together, not because you've earned it or deserved it, but because that's his nature. That's who he is. That's how he loves. But there's something else hidden in these 4 words that most people miss, and it's absolutely crucial for understanding the rest of the psalm. When David says, "The Lord is my shepherd," he's also making a declaration about his own identity. He's saying, "I am his sheep." See, now that might not sound particularly flattering to our modern ears. We live in a culture that celebrates independence, self-reliance, being your own boss, making your own way. The idea of being sheep, of being dependent on someone else for our basic needs, of following rather than leading, goes against everything our world tells us about success and significance. But David understood something that we've forgotten in our rush towards self-sufficiency. He understood that sheep who try to shepherd themselves don't survive. They get lost, they fall into ditches, they wander into dangerous territory, they exhaust themselves searching for food and water in all the wrong places. They become easy prey for predators. The sheep that thrive, that find peace, that live abundant lives, are the ones who trust their shepherd completely. They don't waste energy trying to figure out where they should go or what they should do next. They simply follow the one who knows the way, who knows where the good pasture is, who knows how to protect them from danger, and this is where many of us get stuck. We want God to be our shepherd when we're in crisis, when we need rescuing, when we're desperate and out of options. But we want to be our own shepherd the rest of the time. We want to make our own decisions, choose our own direction, rely on our own wisdom and strength and resources. But David is saying something radical here. He's saying that the good life, the peaceful life, the abundant life comes not from being your own shepherd, but from recognizing that you already have the perfect shepherd and learning to trust him completely. This doesn't mean becoming passive or irresponsible. Sheep aren't lazy. They graze, they move when the shepherd leads, they stay close to the flock, but they don't exhaust themselves trying to do the shepherd's job. They don't lie awake at night worrying about where tomorrow's food will come from or whether predators are lurking nearby. They rest in the knowledge that their shepherd is watching, planning, protecting, providing. What would your life look like if you really believed that? What would change if you truly trusted that the God of the universe has taken personal responsibility for your well-being? How would your stress level change? How would your decision-making process change? How would your sleep change if you really believed that your shepherd never slumbers or sleeps, that he's watching over you even when you're completely unaware? But here's where it gets even better. David doesn't just say, "The Lord is my shepherd." He follows it immediately with one of the most audacious claims in all of Scripture, "I lack nothing." Or as some translations put it, "I shall not want." Now, on the surface, this might seem like a pretty bold statement coming from a guy who's running for his life, who's been betrayed by people he trusted, who's lost his home, his security, his comfortable life. It might seem like denial or wishful thinking or some kind of ancient positive confession. But David isn't making a statement about his circumstances. He's making a statement about his shepherd. He's saying that because the Lord is his shepherd, because he has access to infinite resources through his relationship with God, there is nothing he truly needs that won't be provided. This isn't about getting everything you want. It's not about material prosperity or having all your problems solved instantly. It's about discovering that when you have the right shepherd, when you're in the right relationship, when you're trusting the right source, you have access to everything you actually need for life and peace and joy and purpose. But most of us live like spiritual orphans, don't we? We worry constantly about whether we'll have enough money, enough time, enough energy, enough opportunities, enough love, enough security. We hoard and grasp and strive and stress because deep down, we're afraid that there won't be enough, that we'll be left wanting, that we'll end up lacking something essential. David is saying that this entire mindset is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of who our shepherd is and what he's committed to provide. When you really understand that the God who owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, who holds the oceans in his hands, who commands the resources of the entire universe, has personally committed himself to your care, how can you lack anything that you truly need? But notice the precision of David's language here. He doesn't say, I have everything I want. He says, I lack nothing. There's a difference. What you want and what you need aren't always the same thing. And sometimes what you think you need and what you actually need aren't the same thing either. Your shepherd knows the difference. He knows exactly what you need for every season, every challenge, every opportunity he's preparing you for. He knows what would help you and what would hurt you. He knows what would draw you closer to him and what would pull you away. He knows what would build your character and what would weaken it. So when David says, I lack nothing, he's expressing absolute confidence in his shepherd's wisdom, timing, and provision. He's saying, my shepherd knows what I need better than I do, and he's never failed to provide it. He's never been late. He's never been insufficient. He's never left me truly lacking anything that was essential for my well-being. This is the kind of trust that transforms everything. This is the kind of faith that brings rest to weary souls. This is the kind of relationship with God that makes it possible to sleep peacefully even when your circumstances are chaotic, to have joy even when your problems aren't solved, to have hope even when you can't see how things are going to work out. But developing this level of trust doesn't happen overnight. It's built through experience, through seeing God's faithfulness in small things and big things, through learning to recognize his provision even when it doesn't look like what you expected, through discovering that his ways really are higher than your ways, and his thoughts higher than your thoughts. And that's exactly what we're going to explore in the coming parts of this series. We're going to see how this shepherd leads us to green pastures and still waters. We're going to discover what it means to have him restore our souls and guide us in paths of righteousness. We're going to learn how to walk through dark valleys without fear because he's with us. We're going to understand what it means to have him prepare a table for us in the presence of our enemies. Each of these images is going to show us a different aspect of how our shepherd provides for us, protects us, and cares for us in ways that go far beyond what we could ever imagine or orchestrate for ourselves. But for now, I want you to just sit with these first 4 words, the Lord is my shepherd. Let them sink deep into your heart. Let them challenge every fear, every worry, every anxious thought that's been robbing you of peace. You are not alone in this world. You are not forgotten. You are not left to figure everything out by yourself. You have a shepherd who knows you by name, who has committed himself to your care, who has infinite resources at his disposal, and who loves you more than you can possibly comprehend. In our next part, we're going to dive deep into what it means that this shepherd leads you to green pastures and still waters. We're going to discover how God provides not just for your physical needs, but for the deepest longings of your soul. We're going to learn how to recognize his provision even when it doesn't look like what you expected, and how to trust his timing even when it doesn't match your timeline. But for today, just rest in this truth. The Lord is your shepherd. You lack nothing that you truly need, and that changes everything. Now let me tell you something that might shock you. Most people who struggle with anxiety, with worry, with that constant gnawing fear that they're not going to have enough, aren't struggling because they don't have a shepherd. They're struggling because they don't know how to follow their shepherd. Think about it for a moment. How many times have you found yourself lying awake at 3 in the morning, your mind racing with worst-case scenarios? How many times have you caught yourself checking your bank account obsessively or refreshing your email hoping for news about that job, that relationship, that medical test result? How many times have you felt that familiar knot in your stomach when you think about the future, about all the things that could go wrong, about all the ways you might not measure up? Here's what I've discovered after years of counseling people through their deepest struggles: that anxiety isn't really about your circumstances. It's about your shepherd. It's about whether you truly believe that the one who claims to be leading your life actually knows what he's doing. Because here's the thing about sheep that most people don't understand. Sheep are actually incredibly intelligent animals. They can recognize human faces. They can remember locations for years. They can solve complex problems. But when they try to shepherd themselves, when they rely on their own intelligence and instincts, they consistently make choices that put them in danger. A sheep will eat plants that are poisonous because they taste good. A sheep will drink from stagnant, contaminated water because it's convenient. A sheep will wander into dangerous territory, chasing something that catches their attention, completely oblivious to the predators waiting in the shadows. Their intelligence, as impressive as it is, simply doesn't extend to the bigger picture of what they need for survival and thriving. Sound familiar? How many times have you made decisions based on what felt good in the moment, only to realize later that you were slowly poisoning your own life? How many times have you chosen the convenient option, the easy path, the quick fix, only to discover that it left you spiritually dehydrated and emotionally depleted? How many times have you chased after things that seemed attractive and exciting, only to find yourself in territory that was far more dangerous than you realized? This is why David's declaration is so profound. He's not just saying that God is powerful enough to be his shepherd. He's saying that God is wise enough, loving enough, and committed enough to actually do the job well. He's saying that when he follows this shepherd, when he trusts this shepherd's leading, he ends up in places that are truly good for him, not just places that seem good in the moment. But here's where most of us get tripped up. We want our shepherd to lead us according to our timeline, our preferences, our understanding of what's best for us. We want him to take us straight to the green pastures without any of the rocky terrain in between. We want him to give us the still waters without the long journey through the wilderness to get there. When God's leading doesn't match our expectations, when his path seems longer or harder or more uncertain than what we would have chosen, we start to question whether he really knows what he's doing. We start to think that maybe we should take control. Maybe we should make our own way. Maybe we should be our own shepherd after all. But David understood something that transformed his entire relationship with God. He understood that a good shepherd doesn't just lead his sheep to any pasture. He leads them to green pastures. He doesn't just lead them to any water. He leads them to still waters. The shepherd's goal isn't just to keep the sheep alive, it's to help them thrive. Your shepherd isn't just trying to get you through your problems. He's trying to get you to a place where you can flourish. He's not just concerned with your survival. He's concerned with your abundance. He's not just working to solve your immediate crisis. He's working to position you for a future that's better than anything you could have planned for yourself. But that process, that journey from where you are to where he wants to take you, rarely looks like what you expect. It involves detours that don't make sense. It includes waiting periods that test your patience. It requires you to walk through terrain that challenges your faith and stretches your trust. And this is where the rubber meets the road in your relationship with God. This is where you discover whether you really believe that the Lord is your shepherd, or whether you just like the idea when it's convenient, because following a shepherd means going where he leads, even when you can't see the destination. It means trusting his timing, even when it doesn't match your urgency. It means believing in his wisdom, even when his methods seem strange. Let me tell you about Sarah. Sarah came to me 3 years ago, absolutely devastated. She had been laid off from a job she loved, a job she thought was her calling, a job she believed God had given her. For months, she applied everywhere, interviewed constantly, and got rejection after rejection. She was angry at God, confused about his plan, convinced that he had abandoned her or forgotten about her. But here's what Sarah couldn't see in the middle of her crisis. Here's what her shepherd was orchestrating while she was struggling to understand. During those months of unemployment, Sarah was forced to confront some deep issues in her life that she had been avoiding for years. She had been using work as a way to escape from dealing with a troubled marriage. She had been defining her worth by her professional success instead of her identity as God's daughter. The job loss that felt like abandonment was actually her shepherd leading her away from pasture that looked green, but was slowly poisoning her soul. The waiting period that felt like punishment was actually preparation for something better than she had ever imagined. And the rejection that felt like failure was actually protection from opportunities that would have kept her stuck in patterns that were preventing her from truly thriving. Today, Sarah has a job she loves even more than her previous one. But more importantly, she has a marriage that's been restored, a sense of identity that's rooted in something deeper than her career, and a trust in God's timing that sustains her through every season. She looks back on that dark period and says, "I can see now that my shepherd was leading me to green pastures all along. I just couldn't see it from where I was standing." This is what David understood when he wrote these words. This is why he could make such a bold declaration even in the middle of his own crisis. He had learned to trust not just his shepherd's heart, but his shepherd's wisdom. He had learned to follow not just when the path made sense, but especially when it didn't. And this brings us to something crucial that I need you to understand about the nature of trust. Real trust isn't required when you can see the outcome. Real trust isn't needed when the path is clear and the destination is obvious. Real trust only becomes necessary when you're asked to follow without knowing where you're going. Abraham trusted God when he was called to leave his homeland and go to a place he had never seen. Moses trusted God when he was called to lead people through a wilderness toward a promise he would never personally experience. Mary trusted God when she was asked to carry a child that would change everything about her life, even though she didn't understand how it was possible. And David trusted God to be his shepherd, even when that meant fleeing from his own son, even when it meant living in caves, even when it meant watching his kingdom crumble around him. Because David had learned something that most of us are still trying to figure out. The quality of your shepherd matters more than the comfort of your current circumstances. You see, we live in a culture that has taught us to evaluate everything based on immediate results. If something doesn't feel good right now, if it doesn't solve our problems quickly, if it doesn't give us what we want when we want it, we assume it's not working. We assume we need to try something else, find a different path, take control of the situation ourselves. But shepherding doesn't work according to our cultural expectations. Shepherding is about long-term well-being, not short-term comfort. It's about ultimate destination, not immediate gratification. It's about what's truly best for the sheep, not what the sheep think they want in the moment. This is why so many people struggle in their relationship with God. They want him to be their shepherd when they're in crisis, but they want to be their own shepherd when life is going well. They want his intervention when they're desperate, but they want their independence when they're comfortable. They want his wisdom when they're confused, but they want their own way when they think they know better. But David is describing a completely different way of living. He's describing a life where you trust your shepherd's leading in every season, not just the difficult ones. A life where you follow his guidance even when it takes you through uncomfortable territory. A life where you rest in his provision even when it doesn't look like what you expected. And here's what happens when you learn to live this way. You stop exhausting yourself trying to control outcomes you were never meant to control. You stop lying awake at night, worrying about problems that your shepherd is already working to solve. You stop making desperate decisions based on fear because you know that your shepherd sees the bigger picture and is positioning you for something better than you could arrange for yourself. This doesn't mean you become passive or irresponsible. Remember, sheep aren't lazy. They graze actively. They move when the shepherd leads. They stay alert to his voice. But they don't waste energy trying to do the shepherd's job. They don't exhaust themselves trying to plan the route or scout for predators or find the next source of food and water. When you really understand what it means to have the Lord as your shepherd, you discover a completely different way of living. You learn to work diligently without being driven by anxiety. You learn to plan wisely without being controlled by fear. You learn to pursue goals without being destroyed when those goals don't unfold according to your timeline. Most importantly, you learn to rest. Not the kind of rest that comes from having all your problems solved, but the kind of rest that comes from knowing that someone infinitely wiser and more powerful than you is actively working on your behalf, even when you can't see what he's doing. And this brings us to one of the most beautiful aspects of David's declaration, the present tense. He doesn't say, "The Lord will be my shepherd someday," or "The Lord was my shepherd in the past." He says, "The Lord is my shepherd." Right now, in this moment, in the middle of whatever you're facing, your shepherd isn't waiting for you to get your act together before he starts caring for you. He isn't withholding his guidance until you prove that you deserve it. He isn't delaying his provision until you earn it through perfect behavior. He is your shepherd right now, today, in the middle of your mess, in the middle of your confusion, in the middle of your fear. This means that every worry you're carrying, every problem you're trying to solve, every decision you're trying to make, every fear that's keeping you awake at night, none of these things are yours to bear alone. You have a shepherd who is actively involved in every detail of your life, who is working behind the scenes in ways you can't see, who is orchestrating circumstances and opening doors and moving pieces on a chessboard so vast that you can only see a tiny fraction of what's actually happening. But here's what I've learned about recognizing your shepherd's work in your life. It rarely looks like what you expect. God's provision often comes disguised as something you wouldn't have chosen. His protection often looks like doors closing rather than opening. His guidance often feels like waiting rather than moving. This is why so many people miss what God is doing in their lives. They're looking for provision that looks like money when God is providing wisdom. They're looking for protection that looks like comfort when God is protecting them through challenge. They're looking for guidance that looks like open doors when God is guiding them through periods of preparation. Your shepherd knows exactly what you need, exactly when you need it, and exactly how to provide it in a way that will be truly beneficial for your long-term well-being. But his methods are higher than your methods. His timing is different from your timing, and his definition of what's best for you is far more comprehensive than your definition. This is why David could say with such confidence, "I lack nothing." Not because his circumstances were perfect, but because he had learned to recognize his shepherd's provision even when it didn't look like what he had expected. He had learned to trust his shepherd's timing even when it didn't match his urgency. He had learned to rest in his shepherd's wisdom even when he couldn't understand the plan. And this is exactly what we're going to explore in the next part of our series. We're going to discover what it looks like when your shepherd leads you to green pastures and still waters. We're going to learn how to recognize God's provision in your life, even when it's disguised as something you wouldn't have chosen. We're going to understand how to trust his timing, even when every fiber of your being wants to rush ahead or give up entirely. But before we go there, I want you to spend some time really considering what we've talked about today. Look at your life right now. Look at the areas where you're struggling, where you're worried, where you're trying to control outcomes that are beyond your control. What would change if you really believed that the Lord is your shepherd? What would you stop doing? What would you start doing? How would your stress level change? How would your decision-making process change? How would your sleep change? More importantly, what's keeping you from fully trusting his leadership in your life? What areas are you still trying to shepherd yourself? What decisions are you making based on fear rather than faith? What circumstances are you allowing to define your sense of security instead of resting in the security of having the perfect shepherd? These aren't just theological questions. These are practical, life-changing questions that will determine whether you experience the rest and peace that David is describing, or whether you continue to exhaust yourself trying to be your own shepherd. Because here's what I've discovered after walking with thousands of people through their deepest struggles. The moment you truly surrender control to your shepherd, the moment you stop trying to do his job and start trusting him to do it, everything changes. Not necessarily your circumstances, though sometimes those change too. But something deeper changes, something that affects how you experience every aspect of your life. You discover what it means to lack nothing, not because you have everything you want, but because you have everything you need. You discover what it means to rest, not because all your problems are solved, but because you know that your shepherd is actively working on your behalf. You discover what it means to have peace, not because your life is free from challenges, but because you're anchored to something that cannot be shaken. This is the life that David is describing in Psalm 23. This is the life that your shepherd wants to lead you into. This is the rest that he wants to give to your weary soul. So stop trying to shepherd yourself. Stop exhausting yourself with worry and fear and the desperate need to control everything. Your shepherd is calling your name. He's ready to lead you to green pastures and still waters. But first, you have to be willing to follow. In our culture of instant everything, we've forgotten what it means to be led. We want to be the CEO of our own lives, the architect of our own destiny, the master of our own fate. We've been told that dependence is weakness, that following is failure, that trusting someone else with the direction of your life is somehow beneath you. But David understood something that our achievement-obsessed world has completely missed. The most successful life is not the one you lead, but the one you allow to be led by the right shepherd. Think about the last time you tried to navigate somewhere without GPS, without a map, without any guidance at all. Maybe you were driving through an unfamiliar city, confident in your sense of direction, convinced you could figure it out on your own. What happened? You probably drove in circles for hours, wasted gas, got increasingly frustrated, and eventually ended up more lost than when you started. And the moment you finally swallowed your pride and asked for directions, suddenly the path became clear. That's exactly what most of us are doing with our lives. We're driving in circles, burning through our energy and resources, getting increasingly frustrated with our lack of progress, all because we're too proud to admit that we need guidance from someone who actually knows the way. But here's what makes David's declaration even more remarkable. He's not just saying that he needs guidance occasionally when he's really confused or facing a major decision. He's saying that his entire life is under the leadership of his shepherd. Every day, every decision, every step forward is taken in relationship with the one who knows not just where he is, but where he needs to go. This is where most of us struggle, because we've been conditioned to think that mature, successful people make their own decisions. We've been taught that asking for help is a sign of weakness, that depending on anyone else makes us somehow less than. But David is describing a completely different paradigm. He's describing a life where the wisest thing you can do is acknowledge that you don't have all the answers, that you can't see the full picture, that you need someone with a higher perspective to guide your steps. And this isn't just about the big decisions, the life-changing moments, the crisis situations. Your shepherd wants to be involved in the mundane details of your everyday life. He cares about your job situation, your relationships, your health, your finances, your dreams, your fears. He wants to guide you in how you spend your time, how you invest your energy, how you respond to difficult people, how you handle disappointment, how you celebrate success. But most of us compartmentalize our lives. We have our spiritual life over here, where we pray and read the Bible and go to church. And then we have our real life over there, where we make actual decisions about actual problems, using our own wisdom and experience and common sense. We want God to bless what we've already decided to do, but we don't really want him to interfere with our decision-making process. David is describing something radically different. He's describing a life where there's no separation between the spiritual and the practical, where every aspect of your existence is lived in conscious awareness of your shepherd's presence and guidance. He's describing a life where you consult your shepherd before making decisions, not just after things go wrong, where you listen for his voice in the quiet moments, not just cry out to him in the crisis moments. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. That sounds nice in theory, but how does it actually work in practice? How do I hear God's voice when I'm trying to decide whether to take that job offer? How do I know what my shepherd wants me to do about my struggling marriage? How do I recognize his guidance when I'm facing a decision that needs to be made quickly? These are crucial questions, and they get to the heart of what it means to live as a sheep under the care of a loving shepherd. But here's what I've discovered after years of learning to recognize God's voice in my own life and helping others do the same. Your shepherd is always speaking. The question isn't whether he's communicating with you. The question is whether you've learned to recognize his voice. Jesus said, "My sheep listen to my voice. I know them, and they follow me." Notice the progression there. First the sheep listen, then the shepherd knows them, then they follow. It's a relationship that develops over time, built on consistent communication and growing trust. Your shepherd speaks to you through his written word, through the Holy Spirit's prompting in your heart, through wise counsel from other believers, through circumstances that open and close doors, through that deep sense of peace or unease that you feel when you're considering different options. But recognizing his voice requires practice, just like recognizing any voice you love. Think about how you can identify your spouse's voice in a crowded room, or how you immediately know when your child is calling your name from another part of the house. You recognize those voices instantly because you've spent time with those people, because you've learned the unique characteristics of how they communicate, because you care about what they have to say. The same principle applies to your relationship with your shepherd. The more time you spend with him, the more familiar his voice becomes. The more you practice listening for his guidance in small decisions, the easier it becomes to recognize his leading in big decisions. The more you experience his faithfulness when you follow his direction, the more confident you become in trusting his voice, even when it doesn't make sense to your natural mind. But here's where many people get stuck. They want their shepherd to speak to them in ways that are dramatic and unmistakable, like a voice from heaven or a burning bush or some kind of supernatural sign that removes all doubt about what they should do. And while God certainly can communicate in dramatic ways, most of the time his guidance comes through much more subtle means. Your shepherd often leads through that quiet sense of peace you feel when you're considering the right option, even if it's not the easiest option. He leads through doors that open at just the right time, even when you weren't looking for those particular doors. He leads through wise counsel from people who love you and know your situation, even when their advice challenges your preferences. Sometimes he leads by closing doors that you really wanted to walk through, protecting you from opportunities that would ultimately harm you. Sometimes he leads through circumstances that force you to wait when everything in you wants to rush ahead. Sometimes he leads by allowing difficulties that develop your character and deepen your trust in ways that comfort never could. The key is learning to recognize that all of these things are expressions of your shepherd's care for you, not random events or unfortunate coincidences or obstacles to overcome. When you start viewing your life through the lens of having a personal shepherd who is actively involved in guiding your steps, everything begins to look different. That job rejection that felt like failure might actually be protection from a workplace that would have damaged your integrity. That relationship that ended might actually be redirection towards someone who will truly complement your calling. That financial setback that caused so much stress might actually be preparation for learning to trust your shepherd's provision in ways you never could have learned during seasons of abundance. This is why David could say with such confidence, "I lack nothing." He had learned to see his shepherd's hand in every circumstance, his shepherd's provision in every season, his shepherd's protection in every challenge. He had learned that sometimes what looks like lack is actually abundance in disguise, that sometimes what feels like abandonment is actually the most intimate form of care. But developing this level of trust and recognition doesn't happen overnight. It's built through daily practice, through small acts of obedience, through choosing to believe that your shepherd's heart toward you is good, even when his methods don't make sense to you. This is why it's so important to start listening for your shepherd's voice in the small decisions of your life. What should you do with your free time today? How should you respond to that difficult person at work? What should you prioritize when your schedule feels overwhelming? How should you steward the resources he's given you? These might seem like minor issues compared to the big life decisions you're facing, but they're actually the training ground for learning to recognize and trust your shepherd's voice. When you practice following his guidance in small things, you develop the spiritual sensitivity and confidence you need to follow his guidance in big things. And here's what I've discovered about people who learn to live this way. They stop being driven by the anxiety and uncertainty that characterizes so much of modern life. They don't have all the answers, but they have access to the one who does. They don't know what tomorrow holds, but they know who holds tomorrow. They don't always understand what their shepherd is doing, but they trust his heart toward them completely. This is the life that David is describing when he says, "The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing." It's not a life free from problems or challenges or difficult decisions. It's a life lived in constant awareness of your shepherd's presence, constant expectation of his guidance, and constant confidence in his provision. But there's something else I need you to understand about what it means to be under your shepherd's care. It's not just about receiving guidance for your own life. It's about being part of something bigger than yourself, something that extends far beyond your personal needs and concerns and dreams. You see, sheep don't live in isolation. They live as part of a flock, and a good shepherd doesn't just care for individual sheep. He cares for the well-being of the entire flock. He makes decisions that benefit not just one sheep, but all the sheep under his care. He positions the flock in places where they can thrive together, where they can support each other, where they can accomplish purposes that no individual sheep could accomplish alone. When David says, "The Lord is my shepherd," he's not just describing a personal relationship with God. He's describing his place within God's larger purposes, his role within God's people, his contribution to God's kingdom. He's acknowledging that his life has meaning and significance, not just because of what it provides for him, but because of how it fits into the bigger story that God is writing. This is where many people miss the full richness of what it means to have God as their shepherd. They make it all about their personal blessing, their individual success, their private relationship with God. But your shepherd has called you to be part of a flock, to live in community with other believers, to use your gifts and resources and experiences to benefit others who are also under his care. When you really understand this, it changes how you view your struggles and your successes. Your difficulties aren't just obstacles to overcome for your own benefit. They're opportunities to develop the character and wisdom and compassion that will enable you to help other sheep who are facing similar challenges. Your victories aren't just reasons to celebrate your own achievements. They're testimonies of your shepherd's faithfulness that can encourage others to trust him more completely. Your shepherd is preparing you not just for your own flourishing, but for your role in helping the entire flock flourish. The leadership skills he's developing in you aren't just for your career advancement, they're for serving his people. The financial resources he's entrusting to you aren't just for your security, they're for advancing his kingdom. The healing he's bringing to your broken places isn't just for your personal wholeness, they're for ministering to others who are still broken. This perspective transforms everything about how you experience both suffering and blessing. When you understand that your life is part of a larger story, when you recognize that your shepherd is using every experience to prepare you for greater purposes than you can imagine, you can endure difficulties with hope and enjoy successes with humility. You stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "How is my shepherd using this to shape me for what he's called me to do?" You stop measuring your life only by your personal happiness and start measuring it by your faithfulness to the purposes he's given you. You stop living as if you're the center of the universe and start living as if you're a beloved member of his flock, called to contribute to something beautiful and eternal and infinitely bigger than yourself. This is what David understood about his relationship with his shepherd. Yes, God cared for him personally, provided for him individually, guided him specifically. But all of that personal care was in service of the larger purposes God had for David's life, the ways God wanted to use David to bless his people and advance his kingdom. David wasn't just a sheep being cared for by his shepherd. He was a sheep being prepared by his shepherd to become a shepherd himself, to lead God's people with the same heart of care and protection and provision that he had experienced from God. Every trial David faced, every victory he experienced, every lesson he learned about trusting God's guidance was preparation for the leadership role God was calling him to fill. And the same is true for you. Your shepherd isn't just caring for you so that you can live a comfortable, problem-free life. He's caring for you so that you can become the person he created you to be, so that you can fulfill the purposes he's designed you for, so that you can contribute to his kingdom in ways that will impact eternity. This doesn't mean that your personal well-being doesn't matter to God. It absolutely does. David's declaration that he lacks nothing is a genuine expression of God's heart to provide for your needs, to protect you from harm, to guide you into abundant life. But that provision and protection and guidance are always in service of something larger than your immediate comfort or convenience. Your shepherd sees your life from an eternal perspective. He knows not just what you need for today, but what you need to become the person he's called you to be. He knows not just what will make you happy right now, but what will give you deep, lasting joy and purpose. He knows not just what will solve your immediate problems, but what will develop in you the character and wisdom and faith that will enable you to face any challenge with confidence. This is why his guidance doesn't always take you on the path you would have chosen. This is why his provision doesn't always look like what you expected. This is why his protection sometimes involves allowing you to face difficulties rather than shielding you from them. He's not just concerned with your comfort, he's concerned with your calling. He's not just interested in your happiness, he's interested in your holiness. He's not just focused on solving your problems, he's focused on shaping your character. But here's what's beautiful about having this kind of shepherd. When you trust his larger purposes for your life, when you surrender your agenda to his agenda, when you stop trying to use him to get what you want and start allowing him to make you who he wants you to be, you discover that his plans for you are infinitely better than anything you could have planned for yourself. You discover that the life he's leading you toward is more fulfilling, more meaningful, more joyful than the life you were trying to create on your own. You discover that the person he's shaping you to become is stronger, wiser, more compassionate than the person you thought you wanted to be. You discover that the purposes he's calling you to fulfill are more significant, more impactful, more eternally valuable than the goals you were pursuing. This is what David discovered as he learned to trust his shepherd completely. The life God led him into was far more challenging than the comfortable shepherd's life he had been living, but it was also far more significant. The purposes God called him to fulfill were far more demanding than anything he could have imagined, but they were also far more rewarding. The character God developed in him through trials and victories was far different from what he would have chosen, but it was also far more beautiful and effective than anything he could have developed on his own. And this brings us to something crucial that I need you to understand about the process of being shepherded by God. It's not passive. It's not about sitting back and waiting for God to do everything while you do nothing. Sheep aren't lazy. And being under your shepherd's care doesn't make you inactive or irresponsible. Sheep follow actively. They listen attentively. They respond obediently. They move when the shepherd leads. They stop when he indicates. They stay close when he warns them of danger. They trust his voice even when they can't see where he's taking them. The same is true for your relationship with your shepherd. Following his guidance requires your active participation, your intentional obedience, your deliberate choice to trust his voice even when it conflicts with your natural instincts or desires. This means spending time in his word so that you can recognize his voice when he speaks to your heart. It means developing a consistent prayer life so that you can communicate with him regularly, not just in crisis moments. It means surrounding yourself with other believers who can offer wise counsel and accountability. It means being willing to step out in faith when he opens doors, and being willing to wait patiently when he asks you to remain where you are. Most importantly, it means being willing to obey even when his guidance doesn't make sense to your natural mind, even when it requires sacrifice, even when it takes you in directions you never expected to go. This is where the rubber meets the road in your relationship with God. This is where you discover whether you really want him to be your shepherd or whether you just want him to bless the directions you've already chosen to go. This is where you find out whether you trust his wisdom more than your own understanding, his timing more than your urgency, his methods more than your preferences. Because here's what I've learned about people who experience the kind of rest and peace and abundance that David describes in Psalm 23. They're not people whose lives are free from challenges or difficulties or hard decisions. They're people who have learned to navigate those challenges and difficulties and decisions in partnership with their shepherd, trusting his guidance even when it's costly, following his leading even when it's uncomfortable, resting in his provision even when it doesn't look like what they expected. They've discovered that the peace that passes understanding doesn't come from having everything figured out. It comes from knowing that your shepherd has everything figured out and that he loves you enough to guide you step by step through whatever you're facing. They've learned that true security doesn't come from having enough money in the bank or enough insurance policies or enough backup plans. It comes from knowing that your shepherd owns everything and has committed himself to providing everything you truly need. They've discovered that real significance doesn't come from achieving your personal goals or building your own kingdom or making a name for yourself. It comes from playing your part in the larger story that your shepherd is writing, from contributing to purposes that will outlast your lifetime, from being used by God to bless others in ways that echo into eternity. This is the life that your shepherd wants to lead you into. This is the rest he wants to give to your weary soul, but it requires something from you that our culture tells us is weakness, but that God calls wisdom. The willingness to follow rather than lead, to trust rather than control, to depend rather than be independent. Are you ready for that kind of life? Are you ready to stop exhausting yourself trying to be your own shepherd and start trusting the perfect shepherd who has been calling your name? Are you ready to discover what it means to lack nothing? Not because you have everything you want, but because you have everything you need, because your shepherd is waiting. He's been waiting for you to stop running ahead of him, stop lagging behind him, stop wandering off in directions he never intended for you to go. He's waiting for you to draw close, to listen for his voice, to trust his heart toward you completely. He knows exactly where you are right now. He sees every struggle you're facing, every fear you're carrying, every question you're wrestling with. He knows the path that will lead you to green pastures and still waters. He knows how to restore your soul and guide you in paths of righteousness. He knows how to prepare a table for you in the presence of your enemies and anoint your head with oil until your cup overflows. But first, you have to let him be your shepherd. Really let him, not just in the crisis moments, but in the everyday moments. Not just when you're desperate, but when you're comfortable. Not just when you don't know what to do, but when you think you do know what to do. You have to be willing to follow his leading even when it takes you through valleys you'd rather avoid. You have to be willing to trust his timing even when it doesn't match your schedule. You have to be willing to receive his provision even when it doesn't look like what you expected. Most of all, you have to be willing to believe that his heart toward you is good, that his plans for you are better than your plans for yourself, that his love for you is deeper and more committed and more reliable than anything you've ever experienced from any human relationship. This is what David believed when he wrote these words. This is what sustained him through every trial, every victory, every season of his life. This is what enabled him to say with absolute confidence, even in his darkest moments, "The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing." And this same shepherd, this same love, this same commitment, this same provision is available to you today, right now. In the middle of whatever you're facing, your shepherd is calling your name. He's ready to lead you beside still waters and restore your soul. But the first step is yours. You have to answer his call. You have to choose to follow. You have to decide to trust. So what's it going to be? Will you continue trying to shepherd yourself, exhausting yourself with worry and control and the desperate attempt to manage outcomes that were never yours to manage? Or will you finally surrender to the perfect shepherd who loves you more than you can imagine and has been waiting patiently for you to let him lead your life? The choice is yours. But I can tell you this, if you choose to trust him, if you choose to follow him, if you choose to rest in his care, you will discover what it means to lack nothing. You will experience the peace that passes understanding. You will find rest for your weary soul. Because that's who your shepherd is. That's what he does. That's his heart toward you. In our next part, we're going to explore what happens when your shepherd leads you to green pastures and still waters. We're going to discover how God provides not just for your physical needs, but for the deepest longings of your soul. We're going to learn how to recognize his provision even when it's disguised, and how to receive his rest even in the middle of busy seasons. But for now, just rest in this truth. You have a shepherd who knows you by name, who has committed himself to your care, and who will never fail you. You are not alone. You are not forgotten. You are deeply, completely, eternally loved. Let me ask you something that might make you uncomfortable. When was the last time you truly rested? And I don't mean collapsed on the couch after a 14-hour day, scrolling through your phone until your eyes burned. I don't mean that restless sleep where your mind races through tomorrow's to-do list, even as your body tries to shut down. I'm talking about real rest, the kind that reaches into the deepest places of your soul and quiets every anxious thought, every racing fear, every whispered lie that tells you you're not enough. You haven't done enough. You'll never be enough. Most of us have forgotten what that feels like, haven't we? We live in a world that worships productivity, that celebrates the hustle, that tells us our worth is measured by our output. Rest has become something we earn through exhaustion, something we deserve only after we've pushed ourselves to the breaking point. We've turned rest into just another item on our performance checklist, rather than recognizing it as the fundamental need of every human soul. But David understood something about rest that we've completely lost in our achievement-obsessed culture. When he writes about his shepherd leading him to green pastures and beside still waters, he's not describing a vacation or a break from real life. He's describing a way of living where rest isn't something you have to earn or achieve or collapse into after you've depleted yourself. It's something that flows naturally from being under the care of the right shepherd. See, here's what happens when you really understand that the Lord is your shepherd. You stop carrying burdens that were never yours to carry. You stop losing sleep over problems that your shepherd is already working to solve. You stop that constant low-level anxiety that comes from believing that your life depends entirely on your own efforts, your own wisdom, your own ability to make everything work out. When David says his shepherd leads him to green pastures, he's talking about more than just physical provision. He's talking about being led to places where his soul can be nourished, where his deepest needs can be met, where he can find the kind of sustenance that actually satisfies, rather than just temporarily filling a void. Think about what green pastures represent. This isn't just any grass. This is the richest, most nutritious, most life-giving pasture available. A good shepherd doesn't lead his sheep to the first patch of grass he finds. He leads them to the best pasture, the one that will truly nourish them, the one that will help them thrive rather than just survive. Your shepherd knows where the green pastures are in your life. He knows what will truly nourish your soul, what will actually satisfy the deepest longings of your heart, what will give you the kind of spiritual nutrition that enables you to flourish even in difficult seasons. But here's the problem. Most of us are so busy grazing in whatever pasture we can find, so desperate for any kind of satisfaction or fulfillment, that we never give our shepherd the chance to lead us to the places where we can truly thrive. We settle for relationships that drain us because we're afraid of being alone. We stay in jobs that crush our spirits because we're terrified of financial insecurity. We pursue achievements that ultimately leave us empty because we've been told that's what success looks like. We consume entertainment, food, substances, experiences, trying to fill the void inside us, never realizing that we're grazing in spiritual wastelands while our shepherd is calling us toward nourishment that would actually satisfy. This is why so many people, even successful people, even people who have everything our culture tells us we should want, still feel empty inside. They're eating, but they're not being nourished. They're consuming, but they're not being satisfied. They're achieving, but they're not thriving. They've never learned to recognize their shepherd's voice leading them toward the green pastures where their souls can actually find what they're looking for. But when you learn to follow your shepherd's leading, when you trust him to guide you toward what will truly nourish your soul rather than what just temporarily fills the emptiness, something beautiful happens. You discover that the things you thought you needed for happiness were actually keeping you from the deeper satisfaction you were really seeking. You learn that the green pastures your shepherd leads you to are often in places you never would have chosen to go. Sometimes those green pastures look like a job that pays less, but aligns with your calling. Sometimes they look like a relationship that requires vulnerability instead of one that just makes you feel important. Sometimes they look like a season of simplicity instead of the complexity you thought would make you happy. Sometimes they look like serving others instead of focusing entirely on your own advancement. The key is learning to trust your shepherd's definition of what constitutes good pasture rather than accepting the world's definition. Because here's what I've discovered about God's provision. It rarely looks like what we expected, but it's always exactly what we actually needed. Let me tell you about Michael. Michael was a brilliant attorney, climbing the corporate ladder at a prestigious firm. By every external measure, he was successful. Great salary, beautiful house, impressive title, respect from his peers. But Michael was dying inside. He was working 80-hour weeks, barely seeing his family, medicating his stress with alcohol, lying awake at night, wondering if this was really what life was supposed to feel like. For years, Michael thought the solution was to work harder, earn more, achieve the next level of success. He was grazing in what looked like the richest pasture available, but his soul was starving. It wasn't until he hit rock bottom, wasn't until his marriage almost fell apart and his health began to fail, that he finally became desperate enough to ask his shepherd where the real green pastures were. The answer shocked him. God began leading Michael toward a completely different kind of life, not backward into poverty or failure, but forward into a way of living that actually nourished his soul. Michael ended up leaving his high-powered position to start a legal aid clinic serving families who couldn't afford representation. His income dropped significantly, but for the first time in years, he came home energized instead of depleted. Today, Michael will tell you that he finally understands what David meant about green pastures. The work that looked like the richest opportunity was actually spiritual wasteland that was slowly killing his soul. The work that looked like a step backward was actually his shepherd, leading him to the kind of nourishment he had been desperately seeking without even realizing it. This is what happens when you learn to trust your shepherd's leading toward green pastures. You discover that what your soul actually needs is often completely different from what your culture tells you to pursue. You learn that true satisfaction comes not from getting what you want, but from receiving what your shepherd knows you need. But David doesn't just talk about green pastures, he also mentions still waters. And this is crucial, because in David's world, still waters were incredibly valuable. Most of the water sources were fast-moving streams or turbulent rivers that were difficult for sheep to drink from safely. Still waters were rare, precious, life-giving oases where sheep could drink deeply without fear. When David talks about his shepherd leading him beside still waters, he's talking about being led to places of deep refreshment, places where he can drink without anxiety, places where his thirst can be truly satisfied rather than just temporarily quenched. In our world of constant noise, constant stimulation, constant demands on our attention, still waters are even rarer than they were in David's time. We live in a culture of turbulent streams, of information rushing past us so fast we can barely process it, of opportunities and obligations and expectations swirling around us like rapids that threaten to sweep us away. Most of us are desperately thirsty for peace, for quiet, for spaces where we can think clearly and breathe deeply and remember who we are beneath all the roles we play and masks we wear. But instead of seeking still waters, we often try to quench our thirst from the turbulent streams around us. We scroll through social media looking for connection, but find only comparison. We binge-watch shows looking for escape, but find only more noise. We pursue experiences looking for meaning, but find only temporary distraction. Your shepherd knows where the still waters are. He knows where you can find the kind of peace that actually refreshes your soul, the kind of quiet that actually restores your strength, the kind of rest that actually prepares you for what's ahead rather than just helping you escape from what's behind. But here's what I've learned about still waters. They're usually found in places that require you to stop. They're discovered in moments of intentional pause, in seasons of deliberate withdrawal from the chaos around you, in choices to step back from the rushing current of constant activity and allow your soul to find its footing again. This is why so many people struggle to experience the peace that David describes. They want still waters, but they're not willing to leave the turbulent streams they've become addicted to. They want rest for their souls, but they're not willing to create space for that rest in their overcrowded lives. They want refreshment, but they're not willing to step away from the sources of depletion long enough to receive it. Your shepherd is constantly inviting you beside still waters, but you have to be willing to follow him there. You have to be willing to turn off the phone, step away from the screen, create margins in your schedule, say no to good opportunities so you can say yes to what your soul actually needs. Sometimes still waters look like early morning quiet time before the world wakes up and starts making demands on your attention. Sometimes they look like evening walks where you can process the day and reconnect with your shepherd's presence. Sometimes they look like weekends that aren't packed with activities, but include space for reflection and restoration. Sometimes still waters look like saying no to social obligations that drain you so you can invest in relationships that actually nourish you. Sometimes they look like simplifying your commitments so you have energy for what truly matters. Sometimes they look like choosing depth over breadth, quality over quantity, being over doing. The key is recognizing that still waters aren't a luxury you can afford only when everything else is handled. They're a necessity that makes everything else possible. When you regularly allow your shepherd to lead you beside still waters, when you make space for your soul to be refreshed and restored, you discover that you have more energy for everything else in your life, not less. You work more effectively because you're working from a place of rest rather than anxiety. You love more deeply because you're loving from a place of fullness rather than emptiness. You serve more joyfully because you're serving from a place of strength rather than depletion. You face challenges more confidently because you're facing them from a place of peace rather than panic. But here's what's beautiful about the way David describes this process. He doesn't say he finds green pastures and still waters on his own. He doesn't say he discovers them through his own wisdom or effort or searching. He says his shepherd leads him there. This is passive language describing active guidance. David is following, and his shepherd is leading him to exactly what his soul needs. This is where many of us get confused about how God's provision works in our lives. We think we have to hunt down our own green pastures. We have to create our own still waters. We have to figure out on our own what will nourish and refresh our souls. But David is describing a completely different dynamic. He's describing a life where he trusts his shepherd to know where the good stuff is and to lead him there at exactly the right time. This doesn't mean David becomes passive or irresponsible. Remember, sheep follow actively. They pay attention to their shepherd's voice. They respond to his guidance. They move when he leads them. But they don't exhaust themselves trying to scout out the best pastures or locate the safest water sources. They trust their shepherd's knowledge and follow his leading. When you really understand this, it transforms how you approach the search for satisfaction and peace in your life. Instead of frantically trying to manufacture rest and meaning and joy through your own efforts, you learn to listen for your shepherd's voice, guiding you toward the places where these things can actually be found. Instead of settling for whatever spiritual fast food you can grab in your busy schedule, you learn to trust your shepherd's timing and follow his leading toward the kind of nourishment that actually satisfies. Instead of trying to create peace by controlling your circumstances, you learn to receive peace by positioning yourself in the places where your shepherd wants to provide it. This requires a level of trust that goes against everything our self-reliant culture teaches us. It requires believing that God actually knows what's best for you better than you do, that his timing is better than your timing, that his methods are more effective than your methods. But when you learn to live this way, when you learn to trust your shepherd's leading toward green pastures and still waters, you discover something that most people never experience: true contentment. Not the kind that depends on your circumstances being perfect, but the kind that flows from knowing you're exactly where your shepherd wants you to be, receiving exactly what he knows you need. You stop that constant searching, that restless striving, that nagging sense that you're missing out on something better somewhere else. You learn to receive what your shepherd provides with gratitude, rather than constantly looking over the fence at what everyone else seems to have. You discover that the green pastures he leads you to are greener than anything you could have found on your own. The still waters he guides you beside are more refreshing than any peace you could have manufactured through your own efforts. The rest he provides for your soul is deeper and more restorative than any vacation or break or escape you could have planned for yourself. This is what David discovered about his shepherd's provision. This is why he could say with such confidence that he lacked nothing, not because he had everything he wanted, but because he had learned to trust his shepherd to lead him to everything he actually needed. And this same shepherd wants to lead you to green pastures and still waters too. He knows exactly what will nourish your soul and refresh your spirit. He knows where the real satisfaction can be found, where genuine peace is available, where authentic rest is possible. But you have to be willing to follow his leading, even when it takes you in directions you didn't expect. You have to be willing to trust his definition of green pastures rather than accepting the world's definition. You have to be willing to receive his provision of still waters rather than continuing to try to quench your thirst from turbulent streams that can never truly satisfy. Most importantly, you have to be willing to believe that his heart toward you is good, that he wants to provide for you, that he's not withholding anything you truly need, but is actively working to lead you toward everything that will help you flourish. Because here's what I've discovered about people who learn to live this way. They stop being driven by that desperate hunger for more, more, more. They stop being tortured by that constant thirst for something they can't quite name. They find a place of deep satisfaction that doesn't depend on external circumstances, a place of genuine peace that can't be shaken by temporary turbulence. They discover what it means to have their souls truly nourished, truly refreshed, truly restored. They learn what David meant when he wrote the words that come next in this beautiful psalm, "He restores my soul." But that's exactly what we're going to explore in our next part. We're going to discover what it means to have your soul restored by your shepherd, how that restoration happens, and why it's absolutely essential for everything else God wants to do in your life. For now, I want you to consider this question. Where is your shepherd trying to lead you toward green pastures and still waters? What is he inviting you to receive that you've been too busy or too distracted or too afraid to accept? What kind of nourishment is he offering for your soul that you've been rejecting because it doesn't look like what you expected? Maybe it's time to stop grazing in spiritual wastelands and follow your shepherd toward the rich nourishment he wants to provide. Maybe it's time to step away from the turbulent streams that can never truly satisfy and allow him to lead you beside still waters where your thirst can finally be quenched. Your shepherd is calling. He knows where the green pastures are. He knows where the still waters flow, but you have to be willing to follow him there. Are you ready to trust his leading? Are you ready to receive his provision? Are you ready to discover what it means to have your deepest needs truly met by the one who loves you most? Because that's exactly what he's offering. That's exactly what he wants to give you. That's exactly who he is. Your shepherd, your provider, your source of everything your soul truly needs. Trust me when I tell you this. Your soul is more broken than you realize, and that's not an accusation, it's hope. Because until you understand the depth of what's damaged inside you, you'll never fully appreciate the miracle of what happens when your shepherd begins to restore what was lost. Most of us walk through life carrying wounds we don't even know we have. We've learned to function around the brokenness, to compensate for the damage, to pretend that the fractured places inside us are just normal parts of being human. We've become so accustomed to operating from a place of spiritual depletion that we've forgotten what it feels like to have our souls truly whole. But David understood something profound about the nature of restoration when he wrote these words. He wasn't talking about minor adjustments or quick fixes or surface-level improvements. When he says, "He restores my soul," he's describing something revolutionary, something that goes to the very core of who you are and begins to rebuild from the foundation up. The Hebrew word David uses here for restore is the same word used to describe bringing the dead back to life. It's the word used for rebuilding a city that's been completely destroyed. It's the word used for returning something to its original purpose after it's been corrupted or damaged beyond recognition. This isn't spiritual renovation. This is spiritual resurrection. Think about that for a moment. David is saying that his shepherd doesn't just patch up the broken places in his soul, doesn't just put band-aids on his emotional wounds, doesn't just help him cope a little better with his dysfunction. His shepherd actually brings dead things back to life, rebuilds what's been destroyed, restores what's been lost to its original beauty and purpose. Now, I know some of you are sitting there thinking, that sounds amazing, but you don't know how broken I really am. You don't know what I've done, what's been done to me, how far I've fallen, how damaged I've become. There are parts of my soul that are so shattered, so corrupted, so dead, that even God couldn't restore them. But that's exactly the kind of thinking that keeps you trapped in brokenness when restoration is available. That's precisely the lie that prevents you from receiving the healing your shepherd wants to provide. Because here's what I need you to understand about restoration. It's not based on how worthy you are of being fixed. It's based on how powerful your shepherd is at fixing what seems impossible to repair. Your shepherd isn't intimidated by the depth of your brokenness. He's not overwhelmed by the complexity of your damage. He's not discouraged by how long you've been living with dysfunction. He specializes in impossible cases. He's drawn to hopeless situations. He does his best work with people who have given up on themselves. Let me tell you about Rachel. When Rachel first walked into my office 5 years ago, she was convinced she was beyond help. Childhood abuse had left her unable to trust anyone. A series of toxic relationships had taught her that love always comes with conditions and eventually turns to abandonment. Years of addiction had destroyed her health, her finances, her relationships with her children. She looked at me with dead eyes and said, "I'm not here because I think you can help me. I'm here because my sister made me come, and I owe her that much before I give up completely." Rachel's soul wasn't just wounded, it was shattered. The trauma she had experienced hadn't just hurt her, it had fundamentally altered how she saw herself, how she related to others, how she moved through the world. She had learned to survive by shutting down the parts of herself that could feel pain. But in doing so, she had also shut down the parts that could feel joy, hope, love, peace. But here's what Rachel discovered over the months that followed. Here's what she learned about the shepherd's power to restore. God doesn't just heal the symptoms of your brokenness. He goes after the root causes. He doesn't just help you manage your dysfunction better. He actually transforms the fundamental patterns that created the dysfunction in the first place. Slowly, carefully, patiently, God began to restore Rachel's soul, not by erasing her past or pretending her trauma never happened, but by healing the deep places where lies had taken root and truth had been crowded out. He began to show her what real love looks like, not the conditional, manipulative counterfeit she had experienced, but the unconditional, committed, sacrificial love that flows from his heart toward her. He began to restore her ability to trust by proving himself trustworthy in small things before asking her to trust him with big things. He began to heal her shame by showing her the difference between guilt over what she had done and shame over who she was. He began to resurrect her hope by giving her glimpses of who she could become when his restoration work was complete. Today, Rachel is a completely different person. Not perfect, not without struggles, not free from all the consequences of her past choices, but restored, alive in places that had been dead for decades, whole in ways she never thought possible, functioning from a place of healing rather than brokenness, of truth rather than lies, of love rather than fear. When Rachel talks about her journey, she always comes back to this phrase from Psalm 23, "He restores my soul," because that's exactly what happened to her. Not through her own efforts, not through positive thinking or willpower or determination to change, but through the patient, persistent, powerful work of a shepherd who specializes in bringing dead things back to life. And here's what I need you to understand. The same restoration that transformed Rachel's life is available to you right now, today, in the middle of whatever brokenness you're carrying. But restoration doesn't happen automatically just because you're a believer, just because you pray occasionally, just because you show up to church once in a while. Restoration happens when you position yourself to receive it, when you create space for your shepherd to do the deep work that healing requires, when you cooperate with the process instead of resisting it. This is where many people get stuck, because restoration often requires you to feel your brokenness before you can be healed from it. It requires you to acknowledge the damage before it can be repaired. It requires you to face the truth about your condition before you can receive the truth that sets you free. We live in a culture that teaches us to medicate pain rather than heal it, to manage symptoms rather than address root causes, to put on a good face rather than deal with what's happening beneath the surface. We've become experts at functional brokenness, at looking good while dying inside, at performing health while living in spiritual poverty. But your shepherd isn't interested in helping you function better in your brokenness. He wants to actually restore what's been damaged, resurrect what's been killed, rebuild what's been destroyed. And that kind of transformation requires more than surface-level adjustments. It requires you to let him into the deep places, the hidden places, the places you've protected from everyone, including yourself. It requires you to trust him with your wounds, not just your strengths. To let him see your shame, not just your successes. To allow him access to the parts of your story you've never told anyone. The parts of your heart you've kept locked away. The parts of your soul that feel too damaged to ever be beautiful again. This is terrifying for most of us, because we've learned that vulnerability leads to hurt, that openness leads to exploitation, that showing our weaknesses gives others power to destroy us. But your shepherd isn't like the people who have wounded you. His heart toward your brokenness is completely different from what you've experienced from others. When he sees your wounds, he doesn't recoil in disgust. He moves toward you with compassion. When he encounters your shame, he doesn't condemn you. He covers you with love. When he discovers your deepest failures, he doesn't reject you. He begins the work of restoration that can only happen when he has full access to what needs to be healed. But here's what makes restoration possible. Here's what gives your shepherd the power to rebuild what's been destroyed. He doesn't just see who you are right now in your brokenness. He sees who you were created to be before the damage happened. He sees the original design, the intended purpose, the beautiful potential that exists beneath all the layers of hurt and dysfunction and despair. When a master craftsman restores a priceless painting that's been damaged by time and neglect, he doesn't just paint over the damaged areas. He carefully removes the layers of dirt and distortion to reveal the original beauty underneath. He studies the artist's original technique, researches the intended colors, works patiently to bring back what was always meant to be there. That's exactly what your shepherd does when he restores your soul. He doesn't just cover up your brokenness with religious behavior or positive thinking. He carefully, lovingly, skillfully removes the layers of damage to reveal the person he originally created you to be. He restores your capacity for joy, your ability to trust, your power to love, your freedom to hope. He brings back the parts of you that were wounded in childhood, the dreams that were crushed by disappointment, the innocence that was stolen by betrayal, the confidence that was destroyed by failure. He doesn't just help you cope with their absence. He actually resurrects what was lost and makes it new, but restoration is a process, not an event. It doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen without your participation. Your shepherd does the supernatural work that only he can do, but he invites you to cooperate with that work, to create conditions where healing can flourish, to make choices that support restoration rather than undermine it. This means you have to stop doing things that keep your soul broken. You have to stop feeding the patterns that perpetuate dysfunction. You have to stop settling for the mediocre substitutes that keep you from hungering for real healing. If you keep drinking from poisoned wells, your shepherd can't restore your soul's health. If you keep returning to relationships that wound you, he can't heal those wounds. If you keep choosing behaviors that damage your spirit, he can't rebuild what you keep tearing down. Restoration requires repentance, but not the kind of repentance that most people think about. Not just feeling sorry for your sins, or promising to try harder, or committing to be a better person. Biblical repentance means turning around, changing direction, choosing a completely different path from the one that led to brokenness in the first place. It means turning away from the lies you've believed about yourself, about God, about life, and turning toward the truth that sets you free. It means turning away from the coping mechanisms that have kept you functioning in brokenness and turning toward the healing that makes coping unnecessary. It means turning away from the counterfeit sources of identity and security and satisfaction you've been pursuing and turning toward the real thing that your soul has been desperately seeking all along. But here's what's beautiful about restoration. As your shepherd begins to heal the broken places in your soul, as he begins to resurrect the dead places and rebuild the destroyed places, you discover that you're not just returning to who you used to be before the damage happened. You're becoming someone even better, someone stronger, someone more beautiful than you were before. This is the mystery of redemption, the miracle of restoration. Your shepherd doesn't just fix what was broken. He uses the broken places as raw material for creating something more glorious than what existed before the brokenness occurred. The scars become part of your story, but they're no longer the end of your story. They become evidence of your shepherd's power to transform even the worst damage into something beautiful. The places where you were wounded become places where you can minister to others who are wounded. The areas where you experience bondage become areas where you can help others find freedom. The seasons where you walked through darkness become preparation for leading others toward light. Your shepherd wastes nothing in the restoration process. Every tear you've cried, every mistake you've made, every wound you've received, every failure you've experienced becomes part of the raw material he uses to craft something magnificent from your life. Not despite your brokenness, but because of how he transforms that brokenness into beauty. This is why David could write with such confidence about his shepherd's restoration. Not because his life had been easy or painless or free from damage, but because he had experienced firsthand the power of God to take the worst circumstances and use them for the most beautiful purposes. David had been wounded by his own father's rejection, betrayed by his closest friends, hunted by enemies who wanted to destroy him, broken by his own failures and sins. But his shepherd didn't just help him survive those experiences. He used those very experiences to shape David into the man he was meant to be, to prepare him for the purposes he was called to fulfill, to develop in him the character and wisdom and compassion that would make him effective as a leader. The restoration of David's soul wasn't separate from his suffering. It happened through his suffering, because of how his shepherd guided him through that suffering, because of how God used even the painful experiences to accomplish his good purposes in David's life. And the same is true for you. Your shepherd isn't waiting for your life to get easier before he begins the work of restoration. He's not holding back his healing until you prove that you deserve it. He's ready to begin the work of restoration right now, in the middle of whatever mess you're currently facing, using even your current struggles as part of the process of making you whole. But you have to invite him into that process. You have to open the locked doors of your heart and let him see what's really happening inside. You have to stop pretending that you're fine when you're falling apart. Stop trying to handle your brokenness on your own. Stop settling for functional dysfunction when complete restoration is available. You have to believe that he really can restore what seems beyond repair, that he really does specialize in impossible cases, that he really is powerful enough to resurrect the deadest places in your soul and make them alive again. Because here's what I've discovered after walking with thousands of people through their journey toward wholeness. The moment you truly believe that restoration is possible, the moment you open yourself completely to your shepherd's healing work, everything begins to change. Not just your circumstances, though sometimes those change too, but something deeper changes, something that affects every aspect of how you experience life. You begin to hope again, not the desperate hope that clings to unrealistic expectations, but the solid hope that rests on the character of a shepherd who has never failed to restore what he promises to heal. You begin to trust again, not naively or carelessly, but wisely, starting with the one who has proven himself completely trustworthy and gradually extending that trust to others as your shepherd guides you. You begin to love again, not from emptiness seeking to be filled, but from fullness seeking to overflow. You begin to dream again, not the broken dreams that led to disappointment, but the restored dreams that align with your shepherd's purposes for your life. Most importantly, you begin to live from your true identity rather than from your wounds. You stop defining yourself by what happened to you and start defining yourself by who your shepherd is making you to become. You stop operating from a place of scarcity and start operating from a place of abundance. You stop protecting yourself from further damage and start positioning yourself for greater purpose. This is what restoration looks like when your shepherd does the work that only he can do. This is what becomes possible when you trust him with your brokenness instead of trying to manage it on your own. This is what David experienced, what Rachel experienced, what millions of people throughout history have experienced when they've allowed their shepherd to restore their souls. And this same restoration is available to you, not as a distant possibility or a theoretical concept, but as a present reality that can begin today. Your shepherd is ready. The question is whether you're ready to let him do what he does best. Are you ready to stop settling for functional brokenness and start believing that complete restoration is possible? Are you ready to stop managing your wounds and start letting your shepherd heal them? Are you ready to stop protecting your heart from further damage and start opening it to the one who specializes in making broken things beautiful again? Because that's exactly what he wants to do. That's exactly who he is. That's exactly why he calls himself your shepherd. He restores souls. That's what he does. That's his specialty. That's his promise to you. But restoration is just the beginning of what your shepherd wants to do in your life. Once he begins to heal what's been broken, once he starts to resurrect what's been dead, once he restores your soul to its intended wholeness, then he begins to guide you into the purposes for which that restoration was necessary. This is where David's psalm takes another beautiful turn, where the focus shifts from what your shepherd provides to where your shepherd leads. Because a restored soul isn't meant to be an end in itself. It's meant to be the foundation for a life that fulfills the purposes for which you were created. A life that makes a difference not just for you, but for everyone whose life you touch. When David writes, "He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake," he's describing what happens when restoration leads to purpose, when healing leads to mission, when personal transformation leads to kingdom impact. He's talking about a life that's not just restored, but redirected, not just healed, but focused, not just whole, but purposeful. But that's exactly what we're going to explore in our next part of this journey through Psalm 23. We're going to discover what it means to be guided along right paths, why your shepherd leads you there, and how your restored soul becomes the foundation for a life that brings glory to his name and blessing to others. For now, though, I want you to sit with this truth. Your shepherd specializes in restoration. No matter how broken you feel, no matter how damaged you think you are, no matter how hopeless your situation seems, he has the power to restore what's been lost, resurrect what's been killed, rebuild what's been destroyed. The question isn't whether he can restore your soul. The question is whether you'll let him. Your shepherd is waiting. He sees every broken place in your heart, every wounded area of your spirit, every dead dream and shattered hope and fractured relationship. And he's not overwhelmed by any of it. He's not intimidated by the depth of your damage or discouraged by the complexity of your pain. He's ready to begin the work of restoration that will transform not just how you feel, but who you are. He's ready to heal not just the symptoms of your brokenness, but the root causes that created the brokenness in the first place. He's ready to restore not just your ability to cope with life, but your capacity to thrive in life. But he needs your permission. He needs your cooperation. He needs your willingness to trust him with the deepest, most wounded, most protected parts of your soul. Are you ready to give him that access? Are you ready to believe that restoration really is possible? Are you ready to let your shepherd do what he does best? Because your soul is worth restoring. You are worth healing. Your life is worth the investment your shepherd is ready to make in making you whole. He restores souls, and yours is next on his list. Your shepherd doesn't just restore your soul so you can feel better about yourself. He doesn't heal your brokenness simply so you can live a more comfortable life. The restoration he provides, the healing he brings, the wholeness he creates in you, all of this is preparation for something bigger than your personal happiness. It's preparation for purpose. When David writes, "He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake," he's revealing something profound about the nature of divine restoration. Your healing isn't the end goal. Your wholeness isn't the final destination. Your shepherd restores your soul so that you can walk in the purposes for which you were created, so that your life can bring glory to his name and blessing to others who desperately need what you've learned through your journey from brokenness to wholeness. This is where many people get stuck in their spiritual journey. They want God to fix their problems, heal their wounds, and make their lives better. But they resist the idea that their restoration comes with responsibility. They want the benefits of being shepherded without accepting the call to help shepherd others. They want to receive grace without extending it, experience healing without becoming healers, find purpose without fulfilling purpose. But your shepherd has a bigger vision for your life than just your personal comfort and happiness. He sees how your story of restoration can become a source of hope for others who are still trapped in brokenness. He knows how the wisdom you've gained through your struggles can guide others who are facing similar challenges. He understands how the character he's developed in you through your journey can be used to serve his kingdom in ways that will impact eternity. This is why David says his shepherd guides him along right paths. Not easy paths, not comfortable paths, not paths that avoid all difficulty and challenge. Right paths, paths that align with God's purposes, paths that lead toward his intended destination for your life, paths that maximize not just your personal blessing, but your kingdom impact. The Hebrew word David uses for right here doesn't just mean morally correct, though it certainly includes that. It means straight, direct, purposeful, like an arrow shot toward a specific target. Your shepherd isn't just keeping you from going in wrong directions. He's actively guiding you toward the specific purposes for which your restoration was necessary. Think about this for a moment. Every experience you've had, every struggle you've faced, every wound you've received, every lesson you've learned, none of it has been wasted in your shepherd's economy. He's been using all of it to prepare you for the specific role he's designed you to play in his larger story. The paths he's guiding you along aren't random or arbitrary. They're carefully chosen to maximize both your flourishing and your usefulness in his kingdom. But here's what makes this guidance different from the world's approach to finding your purpose. The world tells you to look inside yourself, to follow your passion, to do what makes you happy, to pursue your dreams regardless of how they affect others. Your shepherd's guidance works from the opposite direction. He starts with his purposes, his kingdom needs, his larger story, and then shows you how your unique gifts and experiences and calling fit into that bigger picture. This doesn't mean your personal desires and dreams don't matter to God. They absolutely do. But your shepherd knows that true fulfillment lasting satisfaction, deep joy comes not from pursuing your own agenda, but from discovering how your life can contribute to something infinitely larger and more significant than your individual success or happiness. When you align your life with His purposes, when you allow Him to guide you along the right paths for His name's sake, you discover that His dreams for you are bigger and better than your dreams for yourself. You find that His plans for your life are more meaningful, more impactful, more fulfilling than anything you could have planned on your own. Let me tell you about David, not the biblical David, but a modern David who discovered this truth in his own life. David was a successful businessman who had achieved everything our culture tells us we should want: financial security, professional recognition, a beautiful home, respect from his peers. But like so many successful people, David felt empty inside. He had climbed the ladder of success only to discover it was leaning against the wrong wall. The restoration process in David's life began when his marriage fell apart, and he was forced to confront the truth about who he had become in his pursuit of worldly success. Through counseling, through honest self-examination, through learning to hear his shepherd's voice, David began to experience the healing and wholeness that had been missing from his life for years. But David's shepherd didn't restore his soul just so he could have a better marriage and feel better about himself. As David's heart was healed, as his priorities were reordered, as his character was transformed, his shepherd began to guide him along paths he never would have chosen for himself. David felt led to use his business skills to serve a non-profit organization that provided job training for people coming out of addiction recovery programs. The salary was a fraction of what he had been making in the corporate world. The work was challenging in ways he had never experienced. The recognition was minimal compared to what he had been accustomed to. But for the first time in his adult life, David woke up excited about his work. He came home energized rather than depleted. He saw his skills and experience being used to genuinely transform lives rather than just generate profits. He discovered that the right path for his life looked nothing like what he had originally planned, but it was infinitely more satisfying than anything he had achieved in his previous career. Today, David will tell you that his shepherd's guidance along right paths wasn't just about finding work that aligned with his values. It was about discovering his true identity, his real purpose, his authentic calling. The restoration of his soul wasn't separate from the redirection of his life. They were part of the same process, two aspects of the same transformation that his shepherd was orchestrating. This is what happens when you trust your shepherd to guide you along right paths for his name's sake. You discover that the life he's leading you toward is not just better for you, but better for everyone whose life you touch. You find that the purposes he's calling you to fulfill are not just meaningful to you, but meaningful in the larger story he's writing through his people. But following your shepherd's guidance along right paths requires something that goes against every instinct of our self-centered culture. It requires you to care more about his reputation than your own, more about his glory than your comfort, more about his purposes than your preferences. When David says his shepherd guides him for his name's sake, he's acknowledging that the ultimate goal of divine guidance isn't David's personal benefit. It's God's glory. It's the honor of his name. It's the advancement of his kingdom. David's blessing, David's success, David's fulfillment are all byproducts of living in alignment with God's larger purposes, not the primary objectives. This is a radical shift in thinking for most of us. We've been conditioned to evaluate every decision based on how it will affect us, how it will advance our goals, how it will improve our situation. But your shepherd is inviting you to evaluate decisions based on how they will honor his name, advance his kingdom, serve his purposes. This doesn't mean you become a doormat or that your needs and desires don't matter. Your shepherd cares deeply about your well-being, your happiness, your fulfillment. But he knows that these things are best achieved not when you make them your primary focus, But when you make his glory your primary focus and trust him to take care of everything else, when you live for his name's sake, when you allow him to guide you along paths that honor him rather than just benefit you, something beautiful happens. You discover that his glory and your good aren't in competition with each other. They're perfectly aligned. What brings him the most honor is also what brings you the most joy. What advances his kingdom is also what fulfills your deepest purpose. What serves his name is also what satisfies your soul. But this alignment doesn't happen automatically. It happens as your shepherd continues the work of restoration in your heart, as he continues to heal the places where your desires have been corrupted by sin and selfishness, as he continues to align your will with his will through the ongoing process of sanctification. This is why the guidance along right paths comes after the restoration of your soul in David's psalm. You can't walk in God's purposes while your heart is still broken, your mind is still confused, your will is still rebellious. The restoration has to happen first. The healing has to come before the guidance can be effectively received and followed. But once your soul is restored, once your heart is aligned with his heart, once your desires begin to reflect his desires, then his guidance becomes not just clear, but compelling. You don't follow his leading reluctantly, as if you're sacrificing your happiness for his glory. You follow his leading eagerly, because you've discovered that his paths are the paths that lead to the deepest satisfaction, the most meaningful life, the greatest joy. This is what Jesus meant when he said his yoke is easy and his burden is light. Not that following God requires no effort or sacrifice, but that when your heart is aligned with his heart, when your purposes are aligned with his purposes, then obedience becomes natural rather than forced, joyful rather than burdensome, fulfilling rather than depleting. Your shepherd knows exactly where he wants to lead you. He sees the path that will maximize both his glory and your good. He understands how your unique gifts and experiences and personality can be used to serve his kingdom in ways that no one else can serve. He has purposes for your life that are specific to you, designed for you, impossible without you. But he can only guide you along those right paths if you're willing to follow his leading, even when it takes you in directions you didn't expect, even when it requires sacrifices you didn't want to make, even when it means saying no to opportunities that look good from a worldly perspective, so you can say yes to the calling he's placed on your life. This is where many people struggle in their relationship with God. They want him to bless their plans rather than trusting his plans. They want him to open doors they've chosen rather than walking through doors he opens. They want him to guide them along paths that align with their preferences rather than surrendering their preferences to his wisdom. But your shepherd's guidance is always better than your planning. His paths are always more beneficial than your paths. His purposes for your life are always more fulfilling than your purposes for your life, even when they don't look like it from your limited perspective. Even when they require you to trust him in ways that feel uncomfortable, even when they lead you through terrain you would never have chosen to traverse. Because your shepherd sees the end from the beginning. He knows not just where you are now, but where you need to end up. He knows not just what you want, but what you actually need. He knows not just what would make you happy temporarily, but what will give you lasting joy and eternal significance. When you learn to trust his guidance along right paths for his name's sake, when you surrender your agenda to his agenda, when you care more about his glory than your comfort, you discover something that most people never experience. A life that matters not just for time, but for eternity. Not just for you, but for everyone whose life you touch. Not just in your small corner of the world, but in the larger story God is writing through his people. You become part of something bigger than yourself. Your life takes on significance that extends far beyond your personal success or happiness. Your restored soul becomes a source of hope for others who are still broken. Your healed heart becomes a channel of grace for others who are still wounded. Your transformed life becomes a testimony to the power of the shepherd who specializes in restoration and purpose. This is what David understood about his shepherd's guidance. This is why he could follow that guidance with confidence even when it led him through difficult seasons, challenging circumstances, dangerous territory. He knew that his shepherd's paths were right paths, that his shepherd's purposes were good purposes, that his shepherd's name was worthy of any sacrifice required to honor it. And this same shepherd wants to guide you along right paths for his name's sake. He wants to use your restored soul as the foundation for a life that brings him glory and brings others blessing. He wants to take everything you've learned through your journey from brokenness to wholeness and use it to serve his kingdom in ways that will impact eternity. But it starts with surrender. It begins with trusting his guidance even when you can't see the destination. It requires believing that his purposes for your life are better than your purposes for your life, that his plans are more beneficial than your plans, that his glory and your good are perfectly aligned, even when it doesn't feel that way. Are you ready for that kind of life? Are you ready to stop trying to use God to bless your agenda and start allowing him to use you for his agenda? Are you ready to care more about his name than your reputation? More about his kingdom than your comfort, more about his purposes than your preferences, because that's exactly what he's offering. That's exactly where he wants to lead you. That's exactly what becomes possible when you let your shepherd guide you along right paths for his name's sake. Your life can matter in ways you never imagined. Your story can bring hope to people you haven't even met yet. Your restored soul can become a source of restoration for others who are still broken. But it all starts with trusting your shepherd's guidance, even when that guidance leads you along paths you never would have chosen for yourself. Your shepherd is calling. He sees the right paths for your life. He knows how to get you where you need to go. But you have to be willing to follow his leading, to trust his wisdom, to surrender your will to his will. Because that's where the adventure really begins. That's where your restored soul finds its true purpose. That's where your life becomes part of the beautiful, eternal story your shepherd is writing through his people. The right paths are before you. Your shepherd is ready to guide you along them. The only question is whether you're ready to follow.